Hey folks, Jimmy here, aka Palette of the Dead. Welcome back to the channel and welcome to the latest issue of Warhammer Age of Sigmar Stormbringer magazine. Now, as per usual with all these videos, if you like them, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and of course, drop me a comment down below. I love hearing back from you guys and it goes a massive way to helping out the channel too. Now, this week we're on issue 17, but before we jump into that, obviously issue 16 is still MIA. Now, I'm a day early with issue 17 and a week behind with issue 16. When issue 16 turns up, there will be a video on it. I have no idea when it is going to show its face. Neither does my local news agent, in all honesty. They've pestered the distributor to get it and they're not getting much response. So we don't know what's going on. So it is what it is. We'll move on, we'll carry on, and I'm sure it'll turn up soon, hopefully. Anyway, back to issue 17. Issue 17 is a paint issue. We get 2 pots of paint as per usual. We get a bad and black. Very, very handy to have and pretty decent. I'm not going to lie, I have tons of it though. And then we get Agrax Earthshade. Also very, very handy to have. So, whether you want to have that kind of half swampy look like I did for instance, my Oryx, and I'm not going to lie, I'm going to show you my Hobgrot. So, the Hobgrot has that kind of glistening kind of base at the moment, and that is due to Agrax Earthshade over Stirland Mud, and that's all I've done with it. I've not really done too much more. A little tiny bit of dry brush before I applied the shade, and it works very, very well, and gives it that kind of a little bit of a wetter mud look. So, anyway, into the issue we go though. First off, we're greeted by the Cruel Boys and how their war clans work. So, the war clans of the Cruel Boys, so the most common and flexible military formation in the Cruel Boys society, is known as the Claw. So, formed around 5 distinct elements, 1 leader figure and 4 mobs, it is based upon a taloned hand. After all, even the most dim-witted grot has at least 1 or 2 of these knocking around for quick reference. So, the thumb, as the strongest digit and the mark of the cunning toolmaker, represents the Claw's boss or shaman. The largest and fightiest warriors in the Cruel Boys Claw are honoured by being members of the Jab Finger. The next is the middle finger, the most raucous of their number. It is their job to rile up the war clan's adversaries, kind of flinging insults and forcing them into making mistakes. The job of the trophy finger is showing off. Usually it features fierce war beasts tamed by the beast breakers, and then the light finger is in charge of nicking stuff and is usually comprised of hobgrots and younger oryx who can pilfer, so why not. But yeah, it's a different way of looking at it and quite interesting. So obviously going off a hand, so you got your thumb, your index finger, middle finger, your ring finger there, and your little finger. So yeah, why not? So pretty cool stuff there, bud. On the other page though, we get a bit more information about the Cruel Boys and how their war clan breaks down. So depending on where they kind of reside in society and their different tribes, so depending on what they do, they can be part of a different tribe. So whether they're Death Spikers, so which will include your Beast Skewer Killbow, your Man Skewer Bolt Boys and stuff like that. Your Beast Breakers include things like your Breaker Boss and the kind of the bigger guys on really weird stuff like the Mybrute Troggoth, for instance, would be on there or something like that. Your Git Snatchers tribe, which includes your Swamp Boss, Snatcher Boss, Marsh Crawler, Slogoth and such like. And then there are the Bad Stabbers tribe, which includes your Killer Boss, who's your commander, your Swamp Caller Shamans, Merc Knobs and Gut Rippers. So pretty cool stuff, and some different kind of colours as well for them, which are pretty good stuff for different tribes. So if you want to do different shields for different tribes, you can. Why not? Have a bit of fun with it. Moving on, you get a bit more history about the ages of mortal realms as well, though, the Age of Chaos. So in the Age of Chaos, the glories of the Age of Myth were consumed in a storm of fire, blood and corruption. Only Azir, Sigmar's realm, was spared the terrible wrath of the Chaos gods. So, the Age of Chaos saw the Dark Gods invade reality in an attempt to drag the mortal realms into the hellish realm of Chaos. At first, The dark gods were subtle, using their power to manipulate mortal cults to their service. They exploited the flaws in the minds of humans, dwarden and elves, fanning the flames of ambition and greed into an inferno of war. So, as you can tell by that, during the Age of Chaos, the Chaos Gods were being a little bit more stealthy and cunning, and using a little bit more of subterfuge to try and get into the minds of the mortals, so they can manipulate them into doing their bidding, and then that bidding will then be able to bring more forth chaos and stuff like that. Really cool stuff. Bit of information for you. If you did Mortal Realms magazine, obviously you're going to have a lot of this information already. Obviously it's just slightly worded different and brought about in a different way, but it all amounts to the same thing. Some passages will be pretty much identical to Mortal Realms magazine at some point, I'm absolutely sure of it, but it's not a bad little bit of information. And if you like your lore and history and things like that, definitely worth having a nosy at these little bits. Moving on though, we have a bit of a painting section. Because this is a paint issue, they want us to learn a bit more about technique. Now, painting technique is very, very handy to have. If you are just slapping paint on, I'm not going to lie, your models are not going to look very good. The paint job's going to be a bit poor, and yeah, it's not going to be appealing to the eye. A little bit of paint technique is very, very handy though. So obviously, breaks down what your paintbrush is. So bristles, ferrule and handle. Dead easy. You can't go wrong. Obviously, you paint with the bristles, not the handle. Sounds simple. Using a little bit of water in your paints thins your paint. Now, obviously, you want to be using clean water for this. Do not use dirty water. If you use dirty water, you're going to get dirty paint. It's not going to look as good. It's not going to be as clean. It's not going to be as crisp. And yeah, you're just not going to be pleased with the end result. So always use clean water for thinning your paints. Obviously, you have to have the correct consistency. So if your paint runs down your palette, whether you're using Games Workshop's kind of glossy paper palette thing, or if you're using photo paper, because you can use that because that's essentially the same thing, you obviously don't want it running all over the place. So thin it a little bit, get the right amount on, and don't use too much, and you'll be absolutely fine. If you're doing it with metallic paints, I'm not going to lie, I don't like thinning metallic paints. I think sometimes it can go a bit wrong. I will have a damp brush though every time I paint with metallics, which helps me a lot better. Using a little bit of water, I don't think, in my personal experience, works as well, unless the paint is quite thick itself. If the paint's quite thick, I do generally thin it down a little bit, but if it's, you know, quite smooth and runny, then I will just have a damp brush and use a damp brush, and it comes off a brush very, very easily then. So yeah, it's one way around it. Moving on to the next page, carrying on with technique, obviously going over things like your multiple thin coats, utilising your brush in correct manner. Now, the brush they use in there, I wouldn't use for painting into little tricky areas. You want a very, very fine tipped brush. So for instance, if I grab one of mine here, that tip is, if it ever focuses on it, you can't focus on it, that's always good. Kind of is very, very thin. It's too thin for the camera to focus on. So I use a very, very fine tip brush, and I don't like doing tricky areas. I would not use the brush that they have given us for that personally, because it's a little bit too thick and I don't think it will go as well as they kind of think it does. That's my personal opinion. I may be wrong on that and you may be able to do it, but I just generally don't like it. For what I do with that kind of area, I generally, on Stormcast Eternals especially, paint the head separate and then put it on the model. So you can paint the model and the head separate from each other, and it works very well. If you're going for a full helmeted mini, if you have base coated, for instance, if you want a black undershirt underneath the armour, if you base coat it black, you only have to paint over the armour areas, which can be far easier. So you don't have that issue, so because you can avoid that bit and not bother with it. Your choice though. Otherwise though, you know, make sure you load your brush just right. Putting too much on will obviously ruin your painting and you won't get the best experience out of it. And then yeah, it is the way it is. But otherwise, Going over your coats can be done. It's very, very easy to do, whether you're going for 2 thin coats or whether you're going for 3 thin coats, entirely up to you. Have a bit of fun with it. Obviously, don't go too heavy-handed over fragile areas because they will break and so on. It's all common sense really, it's all fairly easy. Obviously, cleaning your brush is an utmost priority. I must admit, I'm not always the best at this, but having 2 pots of water or 2 cups of water is absolutely perfect. Have one for washing your brush and one for using to mix in with paint if you need be. Will help things a lot better. So your choice. Change your water very, very, very frequently because otherwise you'll get dirty water overall. So, and use some kitchen roll. Kitchen roll for drying your brushes is very, very handy. So yeah, why not? Anyway, as we move on, there's more details about things like painting dark over light paint and such like, which is entirely up to you if you want to follow that and kind of do that. Personally, I like going the opposite way, a little bit of lighter over dark paint, which works better for me, personally. Then we move on, we get a bit of information of how to do shading and stuff like that. So shading is actually very, very easy to do. You can go for all over shading, which I'm not gonna lie, with Agrat Surf Shade doesn't look very good sometimes. Going for pinpoint precise shading is far, far easier and far, far better. So if you only have certain little sections, so for instance, you want to get some shading in the pages of that book, for instance, yeah, little tiny bit of shading on page edges, perfect. Over the scrolls, perfect. Over things like the shields, brilliant. You're not going to have a problem with it. Easy to do. Just don't overload your brush because shade paint is obviously very, very thin, so it soaks straight up your brush. So take care with it, have a bit of fun with it, and you'll be fine. But otherwise, you'll get some really, really good paints out of everything. If you're following the guide, I'm not going to lie, fairly straightforward. You're not going to have a problem with it. It's a fairly decent basic guide of how to paint everything. You're not going to get super, super fine detail, so do not worry. But throughout the course of the magazine, it is going to teach you how to paint in a very precise manner and layer up, and over time gradually get to the point where your minis are very, very, very aesthetically pleasing, and you'll be fine. But yeah, really, really good stuff, dead easy. Follow the guide and you can't go wrong. Same with the Cruel Boys, very, very easy to paint up, you won't have a problem. Moving on though, we have more information for our basic rules. So obviously, when the Warriors of the Realms join forces, they form coalitions more powerful than the sum of their individual parts. From the rampaging hordes of destruction to bold alliances of order, this combined might is representative in the Age of Sigmar by battle traits, abilities that reward you for playing with a specific faction. So over time, what we're going to get, this is how our breakdown is going to be. So on the Forces of Order, we have our Stormcast Eternals, we have our Sylvaneth, and we have our Cadron Overlords. For the Forces of Destruction, we have our Cruel Boys, Gloomspite Gits, and the Iron Jaws. So obviously they've broken it down ready for us. Playing as a faction does give you buffs and benefits. So for instance, if you're going with full Forces of Order, going up against Forces of Destruction, you can do. However, for most people play as one faction. Some people will go, if you're doing 2v2 games, you can go, say someone have Stormcast Eternals, somebody have Cadron Overlords going up against, say, like the Cruel Boys and the Iron Jaws. Works very, very well, so it's not too bad. Moving on though, we get information and our Warscroll for our Lord Imperatant. Also very, very handy to have, so this is a more updated Lord Imperatant Warscroll. We get the information about how to do lightning strikes twice and all to do with our battles, so really, really good stuff. Moving on, I have skipped through a lot of that very fast. We get our pullout, so we get a destruction for the armies of destruction pullout. So whether it is Mega Gargants going up against the good old Ossiarch Bone Reapers down here, and there's quite a lot of Gargants on that battlefield, which is pretty damn cool and would be a very expensive army to have, I'm not going to lie. You get your Gloomspite Gits running along on Spiderfang Grots, so running on these little spiders. You have a Wargog Prophet going on the good old Boar Boys and such like, which are pretty cool, and I must admit I do quite like them, and they're kind of a more savage orc. And then we also have things like the Ogres just up there. On the other page we get information about the Stampedes of Annihilation, the biggest and strongest, and on the back side of it, far-reaching warpaths and the survival of the fittest, because, you know, the forces of destruction aren't all about destruction. Survival of the fittest is very, very fitting with their kind of a key motif, to be one way of putting it. Anyway, moving on, next week is another good old mini issue. We get the Cunning Crew, which is a pretty cool bit. This is one of these good old Warhammer Underworld sets. Very, very nice. I'm not gonna lie, I like these guys. I've not had them before, and I'm looking forward to getting them. 3 Grots, 2 Cruel Boys. So we get 1 Hog Grot, 2 Grots, and then 2 Cruel Boys. And you know, push fit models, not always the best, but they're pretty cool. Issue 19 though is a really cool one. We get Garda Steel Soul. So Garda Steel Soul is obviously a hero, a named hero within the good old Stormcast Eternals. Very, very cool, and a very nice mini as well. So really, really good stuff, and I'm looking forward to getting him because yeah, it's just a more interesting mini, isn't it? So good stuff. Anyway, I've kept you all long enough. Thank you very, very much for watching. I will see you sometime soon. Bye bye now.